Hi, Adriana. How are you doing?
Hi, Dirk. Great to catch up again. Cheers.
Thanks for joining me for a coffee. I've got my TEDx Luxembourg City mug. So is that like a bamboo cup or a reusable cup you've got there?
uh, a kind of outdoor lifestyle cup because I can tell you a bit about where I am in a moment. But I've wound the lockdown into my activities, and I can fill you in on
It,
that as we go.
it looks like you're in a very cozy wooden cabin. Would that be about right?
Yes, so excitingly last year and earlier this year before the lockdown, I had the opportunity to visit Antarctica, the Antarctic interior, and the Oman Desert on location scouts for our off-world project.
Well, so
It's an
so let
initiative
me
of
let me
Proudly
let
Human.
me briefly introduce you then a little bit. So for those that haven't seen the TED talk that you did for us at TEDx Luxembourg City Women, um, it was one of the most positively received TED talks on the day. It was really, people were absolutely fascinated by what you had to say. So for those that haven't seen it, I'll put kind of a link here below, and I'd strongly recommend going to see that. But so you came to talk about, I'll let you describe it, but I know almost immediately after you left the stage, you kind of jet off. So you were there talking about going to Mars and like these amazing things in your talk. And then almost immediately afterwards, I think you went from Luxembourg and sort of took a stop somewhere and then went off to Antarctica, which is just mad. So do you want to tell us what that was about?
Yeah, sure. It was certainly a year of so much travel last year. I got to tick off my seventh continent as well, Antarctica. Visited Antarctica, visited the Oman Desert, and these are towards our off-world project, an initiative of Proudly Human, a movement I founded last year. So our idea is that experimenting, testing technology and doing research in these most extreme and harsh environments on Earth is a preparation for the first trips to Mars, which I believe will take place in our lifetime. And I'm doing my best to be one of those people that makes that journey to Mars in the coming decade, perhaps with a company such as SpaceX developing technology to get there. But once we're there, of course, then the challenges start. And being on Earth is no excuse not to start preparing for the extremely harsh environment that we find whenever we leave Earth, right? So there are some places on Earth that before the lockdown we had the luxury to be able to visit. So Antarctica, extremely cold, coldest temperature ever measured on Earth was near the Vostok Russian base, which is around negative 89 degrees Celsius. It's truly isolated down there in terms of during winter for 9 to 10 months. You cannot leave. No one can leave and no one can come. So no supplies, etc., can be delivered. So in terms of the isolation, this is really remarkably analogous to being on Mars in a way that even the moon and the space station are not, because getting to the moon even is a couple of days relative to Antarctica being literally inaccessible. So that's a great analog for preparing psychologically, as well as in terms of the temperature for what we will find on Mars, which is cold on average. The desert scenario, on the other hand, is reminiscent of environments like Mars with a lot of sand, which we're thinking 3D printing. What kind of resources can we access to build the kind of structures that we need from the materials that are available? Testing solar power in the Antarctic winter is not great because there's no sun. So the desert will provide us an opportunity to look at, highly light, efficient and robust technologies in terms of getting power from the sun. So those are two trips I had made recently, and I was planning to continue on my crazy travel schedule, spreading the word about Proudly Human and our off-world initiatives, visiting people and locations to prepare for these. And then the lockdown was announced. So that brings me finally to explain where I am, which is I've basically now implemented iteration 0 of off-world, which I'm calling off-world lockdown. So two of us have built a cabin in a remarkably hard to access place down a hill, a 250-meter descent down a valley, which is only accessible by foot. And we've carried like almost 2 tons of material down into the valley and built a cabin. So we've had to grapple with similar challenges to those facing the first settlers on Mars in a different way, which are the same, namely power, water, food, communication systems, and what kind of materials, are you going to be working with? What are your objectives? Ours were to be as quick, as light, and as cheap as possible. But yeah, here we are. So that's been a very a learning experience.
So if we fast forward a few years from now, are you basically saying that on Mars you're going to have a cabin that looks pretty much exactly like this with an internet connection that's also slightly dodgy but seems to work okay?
Yeah, hopefully the internet is okay. Luckily the mobile network works down here. Yeah, and we are using,
Adriana, is this a South African thing then? Because clearly you're South African, you're in South Africa at the moment. You're talking about SpaceX, which is Elon Musk, a South African guy. This obsession to leave Earth and head off to Mars. Is there something about South Africa that you don't like?
So it could be interpreted as that, but I've thought about this, and geographically, I do think that the edges of places, so the same way in which California was like the edge of the frontier in which people kind of traveled from Europe to the east coast of the US and then to the west. South Africa similarly, was like people going all the way to the tip of Africa and then even further down to Antarctica. I think somehow genetically that a specific pool of people may have collected in these areas. A pool of people who are keen to innovate and not leave the place where they're from, but keen to innovate and learn new things. So there could be something to the geographical locations. But part of what we're trying to say at Proudly Human is that the challenges we'll face off-world are actually the same as the challenges we currently face on Earth. And maybe to bring that back to the current pandemic, obviously the reason why we're having virtual coffee here is the lockdown and shutdown economically that many countries are undergoing in order to prevent the spread or to mitigate the spread of coronavirus. Is leading us, I think, to face the harsh reality of the inequality that we face on the planet. I think we always think globally, especially those of us lucky enough to travel a lot. We imagine that we have this global perspective. But I think this situation has locked us down and forced us to contemplate. And I think the harsh reality that the inequality is really at the root of the challenges that we face on this planet, because we're all the crew, let's say, on Spaceship Earth. We've got a limited amount of resources. We're supposed to be sharing these resources between the people and the other species that we inhabit this planet with. And if we have to reflect, which we kind of been forced to do nowadays, where many of us are working or not working from home, to reflect on inequality, I believe, because I think the healthcare system, if any weakness in the chain, in terms of trying to eliminate this virus from our populations becomes a problem that all of us have to deal with. And particularly in South Africa, where we do have sort of large, unacceptably large portions of the population without reliable access to power, without access to a tap within their home, to think about washing hands, etc., without perhaps access to cheap or reliable data, without access to nutritious food. These are all like basic requirements for a functional health system. And these obviously then lead to weaknesses within the health system. And when the health system fails in one part of the world, it fails everywhere. And I think this is really a call for us to address the inequality, which leads to conflict, which leads to a bad scenario. So this is something I've been contemplating, and physically as well as mentally, because building and carrying batteries down a massive hill really leads one to think what populations are doing who are off-grid, in informal settlements or in overcrowded cities where people are forced to find other means besides municipal provision for service delivery. So these are some of the things I've been thinking about, literally as well as figuratively.
So I was going to ask you, Adriana, by the way, I was joking about the whole getting away from South Africa thing, but then to bring that up, you clearly not only have thoughts about, but you've actually developed a theory around it, which is clearly quite typical of the kind of thing you would do. And it's remarkable. I mean, I was going to ask you what's happened since the pandemic, but you've already explained that this is something that you think will potentially help, and that concept of being worried about what some have called potentially a third wave. We've had the initial outbreak in Wuhan, and then it kind of spread across wealthier nations, almost fortunately, so that they've had to deal with it. But people seem to be expecting now the less wealthy nations, as you say, and as you say, it could be that if the wealthier nations get a grip on it, it's not going to go away because of what happens in these less wealthy nations. So it seems to be a huge concern that people seem not to be talking. The media doesn't seem to be covering it very much at the moment, but you've definitely not been the only one to have brought that up. And I think that's remarkable. So basically you're saying that, and this might be sort of a nice way to just finish off our small chat, what you're experiencing now, the things that you're going through, what's that one message that you may want to give as a takeaway? And clearly you've already mentioned, everybody needs to reflect on this, and just from starting from nothing and how to build up something like you're going to do on Mars, hopefully. Clearly that's a very, very important scenario to put yourself through to see how that progresses. But what's the one message, a takeaway that you'd want to give the audience watching now?
Yeah, so I think in some ways setting up a community from scratch on Mars is easier than fixing the mess on Earth. However, that is not the motivation with which I want to leave the planet. I think we are facing the greatest challenges that our society has ever faced. We're sitting at the largest population, to our knowledge, that humans have ever been at. Our technology has grown to a degree which is really fast, and our capabilities are as far as we know, far greater than we've ever had in the history of humanity. So this rapid growth, means we have a lot of challenges. I think fundamentally these are access to resources for all people. I mean, these have to be at the heart, I think, of the challenges that we need to solve as the United Nations Sustainability Goals have outlined. These are the challenges. However, we also have the greatest opportunities right in our hands, because Mars is within reach. And I believe that the voyage to Mars will expand and advance our way of thinking, so that we can think about the challenges that we face in new ways. Of course, Mars is not the one solution to fix all the problems on Earth. This is my contribution to a way of thinking that I think can positively impact Earth. So let me try and put that kind of thinking in a nutshell. I think we have to expand our perspective, and when we have time to contemplate, which we all do now, we can reflect perhaps more broadly than we usually have time for. And I think if we think about what makes Earth unique, it's the life. We can see it from space, and there's no other planet in our solar system that we are able to do this. So it's possible that life is unique to Earth in our solar system. We need to protect that life. We need to protect species diversity. And that then brings us to who are we as humans, and what are we doing here? And I believe a really important part of being human is our capability to imagine a world beyond the reality that we are currently experiencing. And if not now, I don't know what a better time would be to reflect on what that better world would look like. And I don't have the answer to that. Personally, I hope to be contemplating this situation from 2 planets in the near future. But each person will have a different perspective on the better world that they hope to work towards. But I think what's really important is that we think about curiosity, we think about knowledge, we think about who we are as humans, and most importantly, collaboration, because we're all on this planet together. We're stuck here for now, and best we learn to distribute our resources better, use technology to do that, but more importantly, embrace what it is to be human. And I believe that's our capacity for imagination. So let's imagine what kind of world we want to work towards while we're in lockdown, and let's work wholeheartedly towards achieving this as soon as we are released.
What a fabulous message to end on. And just on behalf of those of us who aren't going through the kind of things that you are, and I think I'd like to thank you for making things exciting. I mean, one of the reasons why I do so admire Elon Musk as well is he kind of brings this level of excitement to our future that I think disappeared a little while ago. You know, the concept of heading off to Mars. I mean, it's such an incredible thing to do. Just watching those rockets land, you know, and the fact that they're programmed, that was thrilling for me anyway, to a degree that is difficult to explain, and almost, you know, there's almost no reason why other than the fact that it's just exciting to know that this is happening, and going to Mars and being those pioneers that are going to do it. I think it's just fabulous that people like you are able to research that and make it possible and just make it exciting for the rest of us. I mean, we obviously have a lot of things to consider right now, but, you know, to put that off to one side just for a moment and to believe in this exciting future that mankind has, that humankind has, I think that's really brilliant. So on behalf of people listening, I'd like to thank you for playing a really big role in that. I think it's great to have that in our future.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. And thank you for this initiative so that I've been able to share even during lockdown with the TEDx audience. So thanks, Dirk.
Fantastic. And sorry to disturb your isolation, which I know is obviously quite important to your studies. But thanks for taking the time. Thanks for being with us. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.